Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coach Craig's Sports. Today, we have another deeper dive into Dynasty, and this time it's with Mr. Julien Barnett from the Point After FF on Twitter. How are you doing today, Julien?
I'm doing great, Coach. Thanks so much for having me on. It is a beautiful day outside. It's a beautiful day to talk some football, talk some dynasty process, and dive deep into this. As Coach mentioned at the beginning there, you can find me on Twitter at the Point After FF. You can find all my work on the True North YouTube network on YouTube, or you can check out the website at truenorthffb.com.
Yep, brand new one kicking off today. Well, kicking off today as of recording on Saturday, whatever today's date is, the August 28th.
Woohoo!
Woo!
We're like
today.
2 weeks out from football, Coach.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. But I've been doing my process. I'm like, oh crap, I gotta get all this stuff done. And then I'm like, oh yeah, there's a week between the last preseason game and the first NFL game. So I'm like, hey, that's nice.
Yeah, at least we have like a little buffer there. The NFL was looking out for us fantasy players.
Well, it's kind of awkward because people are always used to drafting around this time of year too. This is like one of the biggest draft weeks, and now you got like this extra week. So then it's like, do you wait or not? That was a big question I had in my home league myself, but everybody agreed to Sunday, so we got to do it while we can.
Oh man, yeah. My home league actually it got a little kibosh this year. Like the people just no one came back. So it was a buddy of mine who's been running it. I'll get into that a little bit with the first question, but yeah. So I'm actively looking for a home league to get into. I don't know if it'll be this year, maybe next year. It's a little late to join one now, unless there's like a last minute vacancy or whatnot. But yeah, man, we may as well get into this, eh?
Yeah. So the first question we got, and if you guys have been following these episodes for a while now, it's pretty much kind of your story of how you got started in fantasy football and how long you've been playing fantasy football for in general.
Well, I alluded to it a little bit, 30 seconds ago, but I started playing with a redraft league, a season-long league. A buddy of mine had got it set up. We played football together growing up, and so he was just looking for some people to fill his league with him. And so I got in there. I made some pretty grave mistakes my first year. That was about, I want to say, so I was 18 and that happened. I just turned 25. So that was 7 years ago now, I guess would have been my first taste of fantasy football. And, what's interesting is before I actually played fantasy from a team perspective, I played DFS, in its very early stages. I was playing on Yahoo when Yahoo had these prop bets where you would it wasn't even specifically based around football. It was just sports general knowledge. And you had to get five of these props right, and it would pay out a certain amount or whatever. And so I had a lot of fun dabbling in those, but I also had no idea what I was doing. I'm looking at over unders for quarterback passing yardage for this game. And just smashing the over in hopes of a big scoring game and stuff like that, and really not putting a lot of process into it. So then when I started playing fantasy and I drafted Aaron Rodgers in the third round, I was like, something's not commuting here. I'm not doing something right because I kept losing. I was like, man, I got to get better at this. I can't keep investing money into this and keep losing. And so that's when I really started to dial in a process of how I was actually going to approach fantasy football. And so I started listening to podcasts. I got onto Twitter, and I was just, that Twitter came, kind of when I started up the Point After, but really that's what it was. And I started dabbling into dynasty leagues and, how does this work? How do, what is it that's actually important? And so my first home dynasty league, that was actually, we just did our third rookie draft this past season.
Okay.
So that would have been, I guess 3 years ago, because we had rookies incorporated into our original startup draft. So yeah, that would have been 3 years ago now. And even in that time, I've learned so much about dynasty football. I'm now in over 15 dynasty leagues. And so I've really dialed in a process in players that I like to target, in strategies that I like to try and implement in the drafts. Because one thing I really love about dynasty is when you do a startup draft, you can trade your picks, and you can't really do that in a standard redraft league. If you're in a normal stake draft, you're kind of locked into where you get where you get your pick. And in Dynasty, you can really go and make that team however you want it to be. And so that's what's really so much fun about it. You get these players that, they're your flag plant players that you need on your team, and you can go and get them, right? Like you can go and trade up for them. You could trade back and try and play the board. You can build a roster that, you are going to enjoy watching and going to enjoy playing, on a week-to-week basis. So yeah, man, that kind of is the intro into my fantasy football fandom and my Dynasty prowess. But yeah.
So you kind of answered the next question too, is just kind of how you got started in Dynasty. So you had that home Dynasty league too, which I feel like some people do have that, but a lot of people that get started in Dynasty, it's just kind of they join like a random Dynasty league. That was my case.
I've joined a lot of Dynasty leagues that way, Coach. Like I said, I've been like 15 now. And I have 2 that are considered like home leagues with people that I know here in my hometown of Calgary, right? And they're not all people that are from here. What's cool is I've actually got in my home Dynasty league, I've got Rich Cooling, who is he's a content producer and podcaster for the 5 Yard Rush over in the UK, and he's in both of my home Dynasty leagues. We just, him and I, like, he started listening to the pod probably about like a year and a half ago, and then he was dropping comments and stuff like that, and we were talking on Twitter, and then next thing I know, I'm like, hey Rich, you want to join my Dynasty league? Like we had a couple people, or one guy leave, like we got an orphan, and he's like, yeah, sure. And then the other one, another orphan, he's like, yeah, sure, get me in there. And so now I've got people over in the UK who are in my home Dynasty league, and we've got my buddy Chris Stroud. He's an avid Dynasty player. He's not a content producer or anything like that, but he's got, I've actually had him on my show a couple times. A really strong Dynasty mind, doesn't get behind the camera very often, but like, I just love playing with him, and he's brought in a few of his friends as well. So it's a cool dynamic for like a home league, because we've got like little pods of people that are like all together, but they're in different parts of the world. And, and it all coincides together as one big Dynasty league. So I absolutely love it. Like, and Dynasty is my favorite format to play too. Like, I just want to throw that out there, because as I alluded to earlier, the amount of like structure that you can actually put into your team is so much stronger than what you can do on a redraft. And like, if you hit on a player in redraft that you like drafted late or whatever, it's like, yeah, it feels good, and you probably win your league, and like it's going to be super exciting. But man, when you can hit on like an Antonio Gibson in like the 3rd round of your rookie draft, and he's just sitting on your bench, and like, now you've gone on to like, go and sweep your Dynasty league, and nobody knows what happened because you drafted this guy in the 3rd round, and that's a great feeling. And the process of it all, like you get invested. At least I do. I get very invested in these players and the ones that I believe in and want to succeed. And so that's why I'm all on board with the Dynasty train.
Yeah, and I think you make some good points there too. And it's like, if you say you hit on that Antonio Gibson, well, last year in redraft, you might be drafting him in the 10th round. Well, now this year you got to draft him in the 2nd round. So if you want to have that same player on your team every year, the cost, if you're right about somebody, the cost just keeps going up in redraft. In Dynasty, you're just locked into them for as long as you want them, essentially. So that's one of the good parts about Dynasty, obviously. And then like, even like you were kind of alluding to a little bit earlier too, you can go out and get a guy, if you really want to, a lot easier in Dynasty, and you're tied to him for a long time, as compared to like a redraft league. Say you're trying to grab Kyle Pitts this year, just for example, like you could trade for him in Dynasty, and you're going to have Kyle Pitts for the next 6 years or however long he plays for. And
yeah, most definitely.
In redraft, you're paying up for him probably in a trade, and you got him for 1 year, and then it's just like, okay, so next year, if everything pans out, now he's going to be a higher draft pick again. It's just kind of the whole same concept there. It just opens up a lot of different strategies in Dynasty. That's the part that I love about it. I love kind of what you talked about with the startup draft, being able to move around in the draft too. There are some redraft leagues that allow that. Nate and I got involved in one this year that we could actually trade picks for the redraft. Nice. It was really interesting because there was a bunch of fantasy football analysts on Twitter. So it was just kind of all over the place, but it was like, it just felt weird because you're not used to that. But
like you see somebody trade up for like Adam Thielen and you're like, what? Right.
or just even trade.
I mean, that might have been a bad example, but that's the idea. Is you see these players who have far more redraft value than they do in Dynasty because of the longevity of their career and the projected longevity that they're not going to have. So one thing I wanted to add too is I absolutely love trading in Dynasty leagues because of the picks aspect. I've kind of done it both ways. I have Dynasty leagues where I've traded my picks away in hopes of securing a championship or making a run, and then I've also got Dynasty leagues I've got both going on right now where I have 3 or 4 first round picks in next year's draft and 2 in 2023, and I'm riding this team out because I know in a few years it's going to be really good. But as for right now, and it also comes down to what's the rest of your league look like, right? Is there a super team? Is there another team in this league that you have to compete against that you think can go out and win this league? Really gauge it, because if you don't think that you can actually win, the worst thing you can do in a Dynasty league is be in that 4 to 10 range. You want to be first or you want to be last. And if you're in that middle range and you're making a run, if you traded a bunch of your picks and then you finish 6th in the league,
you're screwed.
That you're screwed, right? You're screwed. Next year, you don't have a high cap. I mean, you don't have any picks because you traded them all, and you don't have a team that's really competitive unless you got really unlucky with injuries or something like that, and it just kind of popped up and it was a one-off year. But if this is a consistent thing, and if you're looking at these players as oh, this is a guy who's actually only going to be viable for the next 2 years, am I going to win in the next 2 years, or do I need to ship this player while I still can and try and retool this team? So very interesting Dynasty process that that's what I love about Dynasty, man, is the ins and outs and all the intrigue of that, and adding picks into trades, it just gives so much more value in the league, right? I don't know, for me, trading in a redraft league is almost impossible now because I don't have picks to even out value on players. You have to match player to player to player value, and basically someone always wins. In Dynasty, you don't know. It's all perspective, right? It's all about who, what do you think that first is going to be worth? What do you think that player is going to do over the next 2 years, right? The truth of the matter is we don't really know. But when you're in a redraft league, no one's going to be going in and trading a stud just for an upside, 3 upside players. People that do that, they lose their fantasy leagues, right? The ones who are taking on those stud players, those are the ones who are going to win in a typical redraft league. So that's what I love about Dynasty, is how deep it can really get, even on the trading and the startup and all of that side of it all.
Yeah, there's a lot of good points that you made there. Even just the value of picks, seeing how the value of picks moves over time. So you get these picks, you get a 2nd round pick for 2023 that you don't think's worth very much. Now all of a sudden that class looks good, and then you got all these picks, and just being able to know when to buy, sell players, it's all a balancing act. And even going back to these players that you feel really strongly about, and maybe Antonio Gibson's probably not the best example. I'll go back to my example, which is Jeff Wilson Jr. last year. I got him in the 22nd round in startup drafts pretty much everywhere. He kind of, he was the most productive running back for the 49ers for fantasy purposes last year. He's the only one that had 20 points or more in PPR leagues 4 times, which sounds ridiculous when you think about it.
Multiple 3-touchdown games. Does anybody score more 3-touchdown games than Jeff Wilson?
We'll get down a little bit of road here real quick. So Jeff Wilson Jr., he was lower on the depth chart, but every time he played, he always scored touchdowns. He always got trusted with the goal line work, and he was a decent pass catcher too. So that's why I targeted him last year, and the guys ahead of him were guys that had injuries. Now you're looking at the same kind of thing this year with Wayne Gallman, with some of these other injuries. Decent pass catcher, good in pass protection. Supposedly they're going to split the goal line work between him and Sermon, was the early on report. So we'll see if that happens or not. And essentially he's free in every league at this point in time. But knowing when to sell, so not falling in love with the Jeff Wilson and knowing to sell him for a 2nd round pick for the future last year would have been a lot better. Myself, Jeff Wilson Jr. is my boy. I just kind of held on to him. So now he's got torn meniscus, and so he could be done. It's just a balancing act, knowing when to sell players and when not to.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, right? You said you got him in the 22nd round. So yes, you could have sold him for a second, but also holding on to him, it doesn't hurt your team any. You didn't spend high draft capital to get him. Like, you basically got him for free. So if he's producing, RB2 values for you when he's on the field, you're going to be happy with that. And so, if he comes out and he produces, if he has 4 games this year in his, like, I think he's out until like week 4 or 5, I believe. Maybe it's even
he's on the pup, so he's out till at least
week 7, right.
And I think they have a bye week 6 or 7, so it might be week 8.
Yeah, I think the Niners are week 6 for their bye. I'd have to fact check that, but all reality, he's probably going to miss half the season. So like, he's not going to be like a guy who you see at finishing in the top even 36 of the running back position come the end of the year. Maybe he does if he has like a couple blow up games, but he is still a guy who can produce on a points per game basis when he's on the field. And so you're getting him in the 22nd round. He's basically, he's free at that point. If you can capitalize and sell him for a second, I mean, essentially you paid a 22nd round startup pick for a future second. That's pretty good value, but also like not trading him, like I said, it doesn't hurt your team any. So, really, like that's where it comes into play. Like for me, a good example of this would be in that home dynasty league I was talking about. We did a startup 3 years ago. I drafted James White as my RB2. I was like, yeah, like he'll be fine. This is like, that's all I need, right? Bad dynasty process, very, very poor dynasty process. And assuming that I can rely on James White as a running back for the future. This is what I'm talking about. Like when you start to play dynasty, you really realize like running backs are king. Young running backs are king. Old running backs do not last very long and they drop like flies. And when you play redraft league, you don't really notice it that like you really don't notice it as much because you see these players come in and they have their stretches throughout the year or they're good for like that 1 year. But then the following year, like they get that age discount too. You see it with players all the time. Like we're looking at it with guys like the Keenan Allen, who's only 28 years old, is getting an age discount right now. Allen Robinson, another guy who's getting, a bit of an age discount in dynasty. Well, not even in dynasty, but in redraft leagues. And in dynasty for sure. Like, you can go and get him as like the wide receiver, like 12 off the board. You can get either one of those guys, even later sometimes, where people are spending up on some of these younger, more prolific players who aren't going to give you the consistency. So I think that's another thing that is really, really big in dynasty. And I wanted to get into this for the next question because I saw you have on here, how much do I value youth? And it is, youth is extremely important to me, but it's not the end all be all. Like, I went out in that home dynasty league. I'm making a run. I have Antonio Gibson. I have J-Rob in that league as well. So like, 2 guys who I wasn't really expecting. This was the team that I had James White as my RB2. And now all of a sudden I'm in a position that I can go and make a run because these guys have stepped into a large workload. Chase Edmonds, another guy on that roster who I'm throwing in the flex some weeks. And so I went out and I actually traded the 201 and the 204 in a 1 QB redraft dynasty league for Gabe Davis and Adam Thielen earlier this offseason. Now this gives me a wide receiver core of Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen, and DeAndre Hopkins. Now I'm clear this is a win now team. Like I have to win this year. And if I don't, like I'm blowing this team up. Right. Like I'm just going to tell you right here, right now, if I don't win this year, like I can't continue to ride out those players forever. And there is some really good teams in this league. So if I don't win this year, I'm likely going to blow it up and like aim for like a 2023 like resurgence where like I've got a bunch of picks over the next 2 years because I still do have a lot of assets that can go and garner that. Like, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, those guys are still, able to garner a first in, once we're into the season, if things aren't going the way that I like. So 3 wide receiver league like that, I'm comfortable going out and getting some of those like aging wide receivers because they're still going to produce for fantasy for like another year or two, sometimes even 3 years, probably not Adam Thielen at 31 years old. I think he's only got 1 more in him. But the way I saw that was I'm sending a 204, for a guy who's going to give me like a, top 24 season in my book. So I'm happy to go and make that trade, even though I'm taking on a bit of age.
Yeah, and if Thielen has a decent year, you can still probably turn around and still flip him for a second too.
Yeah, and then I've made up what I paid for him, and I got value out of him while he was playing, right? So
yeah, and I think that's like we kind of talked about already. Is just going back to the balancing act with dynasty, And I think I'm the same boat as you, especially when it comes to youth. You value to an extent, but it can't be the end all be all. But you got to be constantly aware of your situation in Dynasty, like you already talked about, whether you're kind of all in this year, whether you're trying to rebuild. And just something that I took away from one of the breakout sessions at the expo, they had a bunch of people on talking about Dynasty, and you have to be aware of the teams in your league. So it's like 6 weeks into the year, you're in third place, but say you're 5-1 or whatever, and your fantasy points are actually like 8th in the league in a 12-team league. You probably shouldn't be buying at that point unless there's like some crazy situation going on that your team's underperforming points wise for some reason, but they're still getting the wins. Or if you're a little bit lower, but you're like second in the league in points, then you could still be a buyer. Just pretty much only trying to go for it if you're in the top 3 teams overall, essentially. And then if you're trying to rebuild, don't try to rebuild when everybody else is trying to rebuild, because then like everybody's trying to fight for the same picks, and people that are trying to acquire players, they can kind of pick and choose who to trade with and try to get more value on their end. Like you don't want to be stuck too much in one situation, too much in another situation. So it's kind of hard to do, and it's kind of a balancing act. And like you talked about, you got some teams that are competing right now. You got some teams that are rebuilding. Let me just ask this too, like your general strategy, if you're going into a startup, what are you trying to do in general? Are you trying to build a team that's going to win right now? Are you trying to build a team that's going to win next year? Are you going to try to build a team that try to acquire as many picks as you can and then kind of try to get a 3-year run down the line, essentially?
Well, man, like in the wise words of Tony Dungy, I play to win the game. And so when I do a Dynasty startup, I play to win. I want to win year 1. I want to win year 2, and I want to win year 3. And so usually my favorite move in Dynasty startups is to trade out of the first round. I don't care where I am. Preferably if I'm at like the top, if I'm at like the 102, 101, 103, like I can trade that for a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, sometimes a 5th. You can get 4 picks for that first round pick, and then you send back like a 7th and an 8th. So 1st, 7th, 8th for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. You know, there's so much value that you can find in those middling rounds. And that's where and when I say value, I mean, you can draft a player like CeeDee Lamb, who's going as like the wide receiver 7 or wide receiver 8 right now, who I believe in 2 years from now could be the wide receiver 1 that, you know, that we're all talking about. And so you can go and you can like stockpile these guys, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, even AJ Brown, like if you've got multiple picks in that 2nd, 3rd round area. And then obviously, of course, the running backs as well. But if you're at the back of the first, if you're at like the 111, 112, you know, most of those running backs have been picked clean already. And so like if you can then, recoup on that value, trade out of that spot, and then, you know, actually like build yourself some value in those middling rounds. That's the way that I like to approach a Dynasty startup. And like I said, I want to win. So I'm going to put the best team that I can on the field. And, sometimes that's youthful, but really like what it comes down to is having that balance, right? And I wanted to touch on the age thing again, because I think it's really important to note what positions we're talking about when it comes to age, because it really matters. Like at the running back position, the drop off is like 26. If you're like 27, if you're 27 years old, I don't want you on my Dynasty roster. If you're 26, like I'm shipping you off that year. It's going to happen at some point. You have a big game. I'll ship you for a second. Like it's iffy too, because you get guys like Derrick Henry who are 27 years old already, but didn't put a whole lot of wear and tear on their body for the first 2 years of their career, but now have had like massive workloads. Those are the question mark players that like this could be a make or break year for Derrick Henry for Dynasty managers, right? Because if you are rostering Derrick Henry and he goes out and he puts up an RB9 season, say he finishes the RB9, but he's now going to be 28 years old going into next season. Like he's already started declining based off of what we've seen over the past 2 years. That RB9 would be a decline. So if he's declining and he's getting older and he plays the running back position, have you lost out on like the value that Derrick Henry could really bring? Is it actually wiser to go and trade him for like 2 firsts right now? And, that's the question that you have to ask yourself. So it comes down to like, if you believe in Derrick Henry as, an elite talent in the NFL, and he's going to be an elite talent because he hasn't had all that wear and tear, and, he's going to shatter the age idea that, I'm touting here, then by all means go and buy Derrick Henry. But if you like me, like I like young running backs that are on their first contract. I think like this is a really interesting concept too, is I almost think, like you have to play those four years, and then there's a team option for a 5th year for a 22-year-old running back. Like if you come into the league at 21 or 22 years old and you play those 4 years, and then the team extends you for a 5th year option, like you're 26, 27 years old going into your first contract extension. Like that's mess. Like you can't make money that way. And so like that sucks for the running backs, and it benefits the team. So honestly, like I think, for the running back position, like, the whole construct of like a 5-year rookie deal should be rewritten to like a 3-year deal, because we see so many running backs come into the league too and bust in like their first 2 seasons, and they're out of the league before they even get a chance to go and get paid. It's a really interesting prospect idea from the running back position. But then like the tight ends, for example, like I almost don't want tight ends who are under the age of 27. Like, because, it's just so rare that they're able to actually hit. And we have seen, we're seeing some really prolific athletes come into the NFL. So I think that narrative is going to change. But, over the past like 10 years, the best tight ends have always been the old ones. Like, the Greg Olsons, even Travis Kelce, who's like, 31 now. You got Darren Waller, who's 28 at this point, right? But like Tony Gonzalez and like, Gronk is in his 30s and, was really elite for quite a while. Don't get me wrong. But that, he's like an outlier in that case. And like, so when I look at the tight end position, I kind of target the guys who are actually like getting a little bit older, because they have that experience and they have that NFL pedigree already that teams look for to get them on the field. They can block as well as run routes. Like, the tight end position is a really, really tricky one. And then wide receivers, I think the drop off's like 30. So like, and a lot of players treat wide receivers like they treat running backs, where they see the drop off being at like 26, 27. And so you can get a major discount on players like, as I mentioned earlier, Keenan Allen, or, even Michael Thomas, who this year is, I don't know. I don't really want to come on here and tell Michael Thomas, because I don't have any shares of Michael Thomas, and I'm not honestly a huge believer. But he is a guy who's older, who has seen a hit to his ADP and his draft pedigree, and I think a large part in that is because of the age.
Mm-hmm. And you make a good point there too. And a lot of the times is these wide receivers that are 28 that have had some type of injury history in their past. So you got a Michael Thomas, a Keenan Allen, people like that.
Allen Robinson.
I guess Allen Robinson did have the 1 year where he tore his ACL. I was like,
he missed like 2 seasons, right?
What?
And like he missed like he balled out in his rookie season, and then he missed the next 2, I think, right?
No, I think he did really well in his second year. Then he tore his ACL, and then he came.
Oh, gotcha. See, this is what I mean. This is why I need to like play more fantasy football. I need to, and it's not like that I don't have enough leagues or anything. It's just that like the time frame of my fantasy football knowledge is a bit capped. Like I try and do as much research as I can about the history of stuff, but sometimes I bring people on my show who were like playing football, like fantasy football in like the early 2000s. And they're talking about like Brian Westbrook and like, like players that I'm like, I know who you are, but like, I was not like dialed in at all to like what's going on. Right. And so like now when I talk about fantasy from the past like 4 years, I know it because I lived it. Like I was living that, it wasn't just like going back and looking at stats. So, that's, if you are going to get into Dynasty, like that would be like my biggest tip is watch football, like start to understand the game of football, right? Don't just like play Dynasty because you want to like keep the players and stuff like that, like really get invested in it. And that's what makes it so much fun, right? Is because we're so invested in football that, this gives us, an even bigger investment. We're like latching onto these players that we've been, drafting in our leagues and are hoping that they're going to be a success for the next 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even I'll say this too in Dynasty too. Figure out a process that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to like scouting players that are coming in, or find somebody that you trust that's good at doing this. And it doesn't have to just be one person, because there's
so many resources, man.
There's not one person that's going to be 80% right. You can look out there. There's plenty of people in the industry. You can look at PFF grades. You can look at Devi Dashboard with Brandon Lejeune. You can look at Ray GQ. There's a lot of good resources out there. So figure out either a process that works for you, somebody you can trust. And so if you're in 5 dynasty leagues, you don't all need to be on the same page. Last year, I had a team in my dynasty contract league. And honestly, I'm like, I'm not going to win year one. It was the first year in the league, and I wasn't planning on winning year one. Dynasty contract's a whole nother issue too, with all the money and everything too. But in that league, I'm like, I'm not going to spend a bunch of money. I'm going to have a bunch of money set off here. I'm going to try to bring on, some young players that I feel confident about. And, everything broke right. I got second place, and my running backs were Kareem Hunt, James Robinson, and Jeff Wilson Jr. for the whole year.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's, and you can definitely play that game, and you can definitely win that way. Like I won my dynasty, that league that I said that I drafted James White as my RB2. I won that league that year. Like, no, I came second. Sorry. I went to the finals that year. I did not win it, but that just is a testament when you've got, I think I had Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins, and I can't remember who the other one is. I've traded him since, whoever the said wide receiver was, but it was another one of like the top tier guys who kind of got a little bit older, and I just shipped off. And I did just quickly want to, we're talking about this so much. I wanted to actually bring up, if you'd be okay with it, Coach, some of my dynasty rosters, and just to kind of show like how you can do different things with this, because I've got, this one league that I'm going to pull up here. It's my expert only league. This was an orphan team that I actually took over. And the team's not great. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. The team is not great. And this year I had a bunch of picks. I ended up having, I think I had 7 picks in the first 2 rounds of this draft. And like Drew Lock and Gardner Minshew were my starting quarterbacks. Like it was a super flex league. That was the league I took over. It had Joe Mixon, Cam Akers, and I had made a lot of moves, and now I'm going to show you guys where it's at. So this is the team I've got right now. So I've got Trey Lance, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Chase Claypool, Michael Pittman, Noah Fant, Devonta Smith, Rashad Bateman, and Drew Lock in the super flex spot. And then the bench, again, if you're looking at this, is equally as ugly, but I got some nice upside pieces in Terrace Marshall, Josh Palmer. And then obviously, on the taxi squad, I got Jordan Love waiting for Aaron Rodgers to move on. And then, Kellen Mond, who's another guy who I do like to emerge, in the next 3 years or so when Kirk's gone. And I got 2 firsts and 2 seconds in next year's draft as well. So definitely like gearing up. But, that was a rough year. Like, it was hard. It was a hard team to root for, to look at that lineup and put it out there every single week. And I didn't even come last. That's the worst part, was I had like 350 points less than the guy who did come last. But he just got unlucky one week and lost an extra game. And so he had more losses than I did, and sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. But then, so that's probably like my most like rebuild team, I would say. And, I think it's in a pretty good spot. But then like this one is that league I was telling you guys about. This is my home dynasty league. So I've got Josh Allen, Antonio Gibson, Chase Edmonds, James Robinson, Allen Robinson, George Kittle, Adam Thielen, Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins. And then we got a couple IDPs in there as well. And then some of my, personal favorite players in Javonte Williams on the bench, Noah Fant, Gabe Davis, Visca Chenault. That's my only Visca share is in this league. And yeah, and so again, like that's a team that I see is ready to win now, but has to win now. And if it doesn't happen, I've got some nice pieces that I can still build around, but I would be retooling for sure. And then just like some other ones, like this is my favorite league because it was a 10-team home league dynasty startup. I traded out of the first round and got an absolute haul. And in a 10-team league, when you trade out of the first round and you get multiple picks in the second, third, and fourth round, you build a team like this. So listen to this roster. It's a super flex league. I've got Russell Wilson, Antonio Gibson, DeAndre Swift, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Darren Waller, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and then my boy Tua. I know you are not a fan, but I also got Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, and Daniel Jones on the bench in that team. Jonnu Smith, Gabe Davis, which I don't really need any more wide receivers on my bench. Hence why I only have one of them down here in Gabe Davis, because I've got CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, and Tyreek Hill, who I'm never taking out of my starting lineup. So again, this is a 10-team league, but that just shows you like the kind of value that you can find if you go and trade out of the first round. And like, really, what did I miss out on? What, you know, I think I had the 108 in this league. So I missed out on drafting, like, you know, maybe I got Dak, maybe I got Saquon there, you know, maybe I get like Jonathan Taylor or Alvin Kamara in a super flex league. Like, you know, that would be who I'm missing out on. But I think that adding the rest of these other pieces, you know, makes up for it more than enough. So, you know, those are kind of like my like three spectrums I've got. And this is like a very youthful team, obviously, right? Like I've got a lot of young talent on here, you know, guys who were rookies last year or coming into their second or third year, you know, and then like some guys like Darren Waller, who's a late breakout. Yeah. So I feel very confident with where that team's at, but then, yeah, let's, I want to pull up this last one too, because so this was a 10 team here. This next one I'm going to pull up is a 14 team league. And I co-own this league with, or co-manage this league with a buddy of mine. And we did the same thing. We traded out of the first in this round. And I'm honestly super thrilled with where this team is at. We drafted this, you know, over 2 months ago now. But was able to go and grab Dak Prescott. Oh, did not trade out of the first round. We drafted Dak. I think we traded out of the second. But then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Najee Harris, Amari Cooper, Robert Woods, Jerry Jeudy, George Kittle. You know, and then we got J-Rob as our RB3, right? We got him in the ninth round of this league. Just a supreme value, especially now with the Travis Etienne injury. And then a bench that, you know, has a lot of upside pieces in guys like Nico Collins, Jonnu Smith, you know, Kenny Gainwell, Jake Funk, Jeff Wilson, you know, is another one, who these guys can step into opportunity. When you're in a 14-team league like this, like it gets bleak. So to have options on the bench that, you know, can step in and, you know, do some good, you know, it could be very, you know, really ideal. And so I'm looking forward to this league and seeing how this team plays out. Like there is some question marks. I'm not sold on Amari Cooper. I do love Robert Woods with that Matt Stafford offense. And then that's, you know, we got Matt Stafford as our QB2 in our super flex spot as well. So like, I think this team's built to win now and built to, you know, kind of have some pieces for the future. And in a 14-team league, when you can go and secure, I would feel confident starting pretty much every one of these players in a standard 12-team redraft league. And if you can do that in a dynasty, full PPR, 14-team league where every single player that you're starting is somebody you'd be confident starting, you know, when you only have one flex, you're doing something right. It's like that's kind of where I'm at with my dynasty leagues and like what I aim to do, what I aim to look for. I tried to show like, you know, all different phases of it, like how I would go about, you know, obviously that first league, I went and traded all my players that I had, you know, my Cam Akers share, I think I had a Kareem Hunt in there, a Joe Mixon. I traded all those guys for picks, which have now turned into these young assets. And hopefully those assets can hit. No guarantee, but hopefully they can hit. And then, yeah, moving forward, everything. So sorry.
And even with some of the young assets too, this is one thing that I did in one of my leagues, and I'll give a little shout out here to what's his name, Mike Lou, what's his Twitter handle? I think it's Mike Me Up.
I think it's Mike Twitter. Me Up. Yeah.
So way back when, this is probably over a year and a half ago, they were just talking about if you're rebuilding, pick a draft class, trade and get as many picks as you can in that draft class in the first and second round. That way, you got as many chances to hit on as many players as possible. My one league that I did, it was a startup, and I kept trading back. I didn't make a pick until the fourth round at the startup. I ended up with 11 of the first 18 picks in that draft. So you look at the draft, and I got Najee Harris, I got Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle. I think I got Kyle Pitts in that league too. Like I took all the position players. I didn't need quarterbacks anyways. I ended up with Mac Jones, I think, at the beginning of the second round, but just to have as many shots as possible. Like, yeah, one of these running backs might not hit, but if you hit on the other two, you're fine. Michael Carter was also on that list too, I think. Devonta Smith, then you got the chance if Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle, one of those two hits, and then you just get so many more possibilities. And if you're in that team that's rebuilding, you probably have the extra space on the end of your bench, guys that you're probably going to cut anyways, so you can make that happen. So there's just a lot of different strategies that you can implement too. And I'm a big proponent of trading back in the startup draft if you're able to, but if you're playing with some sharper minds, most people
they don't want to do it.
Yeah. Everybody's trying to do that at some point. Yeah. Then it kind of shifted from last year to this year. Last year you could still kind of do it. This year you just can't. If you're playing with
that's a great point. That's a really great point, because I do try and implement that, and like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The thing is, like, when you get onto the clock, when you're on the clock and there's a player there that people are interested in, like there's a lot of things you can do. Like I flat out been like, I'm taking this player. If anyone wants him, this is where you got to trade me for him. And that's worked. Like I've gotten trades done that way. I'm not saying that that's the best way to go about it, because I mean, then you pretty much lock yourself into taking that player. And I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you do plan on taking said player at that pick. So, I think you bring up a really valuable point with that. It's not always possible. And when that happens, then you just got to play the value, right? But I was in a dynasty startup this past year that I didn't trade back at all, but I did I think I traded, someone sent me their first for my 8th round startup pick. So I was like, sweet, let's go. And so obviously I'm going to take that. That was a guy who, I was the 8th is still somebody who's going to be starting on my team every single week, or in the flex spot. But I was more comfortable going and getting a future first than I was, drafting Antonio Brown or Visca Chenault, right? Because none of those guys are going to garner you a first anyway, unless they have a massive, resurgence, or they truly break out into the top 24. I just don't see it happening. And so at that point, when I'm looking at, especially in dynasty startup drafts, when someone will offer you a future pick, I just look at the players available. And I think if this were in season, how am I going to approach one of these players? Do I think that this player can garner me a first round pick, or is this going to get me less? Because if you're going to offer me a first round pick in the startup draft for for this pick, and the players that are on the board are there's Curtis Samuel and we'll say Visca Chenault again. You're just not going to recoup that kind of value anywhere else. So, take it where you can, right?
Yes, sir. And that's a pretty good point too. And I think you can look at that and then do the later round too. So I was in a very, very deep league. We're in the 22nd round, and Emmanuel Sanders is still there. I'm and everybody's off him because he's old, but it's 22nd round. So at that point, you might as well just take him, because if he does anything, you flip him for a 3rd round pick like nothing. So nobody's gonna offer you a 3rd round pick for a 22nd round pick anyway. So
no, exactly.
It's guys like Marvin Jones too, guys that that are going to be on the field. Yeah, they might be a little bit older, but if somebody's willing to trade for that player, if they get off to a hot start, and if they're trying to win this year and they can use that player, or if somebody gets hurt on their team, they're going to overpay for somebody like that.
Mm-hmm. When you're a competing team too, if you're sending your second, if you project to be you think you're going to finish in the top 3 teams, the second you're looking at at worst the 210 is the 210 versus for Antonio Brown. I'm paying that. If I was a competing team and I needed a receiver that can get in there and give me weekly production, I'd probably pay a second, back end second, for one of these aging guys who is going to be a 1 year, maybe 2 year rental. Those second rounds hit sometimes, but it's also easy to get second round picks back, right? They're not super difficult to go and buy. And the 301, versus the 210, it's not, there's a 3 pick difference there. And there's going to be, 3 players obviously selected in that time frame, but you're not losing out on that much value. So going to get in the if you buy Antonio Brown for, so let's say the 210, and then you ship him for the 303, really you got production and you moved back 6 spots in the draft, basically, right? If you can ship him for that. If not, then you probably just end up holding that guy on your roster and, riding him out till the sun sets.
Mm-hmm. And even if you get that 1 year out of him and you ship him off for a 3rd round the next year, the 2023 class is better than 2022 class anyways. So
yeah, see, there you go. And then maybe that's the other thing too, is with some of these aging players, people value picks that are further out way less than picks that are right or soon, which is, I get it, but I also don't, because yes, you do not have the the immediate production that you have to wait a full season and then a draft, and then you can draft this player in the in whatever class it is. But if you could say somebody offers you a 2022 3rd for Antonio Brown, I'll just stick on him because it's just the player we're talking with here. Or you can get a 2023 2nd for Antonio Brown. I'm taking the 2nd all day. Mm-hmm. Even though it's so much, it's a year out. I'm just building those picks, because it's not I have to be stuck into using that second round pick to draft a player in 2023. Like that second round pick can now become a trade piece moving forward that Antonio Brown was never going to give me that kind of value, where you can like add it. Oh, I'll give you this 2023 second. People are like, oh, okay. You know, like if that's the sweetener that gets it done, that's going to be a much easier pill to swallow. You know, like people are going to be more inclined to do that, other managers, than they are, you know, an aging player who they don't see as an asset, right? Because it's all perspective. Like these people will see a pick, and that pick can be any of these said players. It's not locked into like whoever it is. It's like, you know, it's so optimistic. There's so much like excitement around what it's going to turn into, who it's going to be. So yeah. Anyways, that's my last little ramble about dynasty trade values.
Yeah. Was there any other tips or anything else you'd like to recommend for people that are still new to dynasty, just getting into dynasty?
You know what? I would just say, like, I think we've touched on a lot of stuff, but really like just to summarize it all and bring it back full circle is like youth is not everything. It is important, but it's not everything. You need a balance. Like the best dynasty teams have a strong balance of both youth and some vets. Like you had said earlier, like really know your league and know what the other teams are doing. Like you don't want to be rebuilding at the same time someone else is. And if you're in a position where you have to rebuild and there's like 3 other rebuilding teams, I would be looking at those teams as like what's gonna as to how I'm gonna approach the next few years. Because you know, if I have 1 pick and I'm rebuilding and they have 3, like who do you think is going to be the better rebuild team in 3 years? Probably the guy who has more shots to take. So like you want to either become those guys, you know, or like do like a full retool. So anyways, there's a lot of different strategies you can go about it, but those would be the big things. Don't overvalue youth, you know your league, know your teams, and then just have fun. Like really like in Dynasty, man, these are players that you're locking on to potentially for the next 3 to 5 years. You know, you got to like them. You got to enjoy watching them play. Like that's not the end all be all by any means, but like, you know, Antonio Gibson is a guy for me who I love the player. I've just been buying him all off season, and I'm pumped to watch him play this year. Like it's going to make my dynasty league so much more fun knowing I've got a player who I like truly enjoy watching go out there and score points. And then those points translate into my fantasy lineup. So it's a win-win for everyone. So, and then if you are getting into dynasty leagues and you have, you know, multiple teams, like really get as much exposure as you can. Like don't lock on to, oh, I'm not drafting this player. Every player has a price, and I'm willing, you know, like at a certain point, every single player becomes a value. And so I never try to like eliminate players as I will not draft. There's players that I tend to stay away from or like I just don't feel super confident on. But at the right price, like I'll get in on it. Like Amari Cooper is one of those guys for me. I'm not super confident in him, but in that 14-team league, we got him in the 5th round, a 14-team league dynasty startup as our wide receiver 1 behind, you know, a really strong start with Dak Prescott and Matt Stafford and Antonio Gibson and Najee Harris. So like I was pumped to do that. And then we wrapped around and we got Robert Woods again, taking that age discount and applying it into our dynasty startup lineup. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things to do, but really like if you're in like 10 plus leagues, like try and get as many players as you can, right? Don't try and lock yourself into building a certain type of team, like really have some diversity with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I just wanted to say too, like if you guys have used the Dynasty Planet app at all, it tells you your rostership of players. And so I've got over like 20 leagues now. And the only player that I have, well, I have Jake Funk 11 times, but every other player, because I was just a waiver wire pickup, right? I just like picked him up in every single league when the Akers injury happened. But other than that, like my most exposure is 6. I have said player in 6 leagues, and I have 5 players that I own 6 separate shares of, and one of them being Antonio Gibson, and that's only like 30% rostership. So like between my 20 leagues, I've got like I feasibly have almost every player in the NFL at somewhere. I have them on a roster somewhere. You know what I mean? Because I do believe that most players, they will have fantasy value in certain situations and in the right time in the right situation. So I'm not trying to cap anybody's upside or say like this is how it's going to be for that player.
That's a good point with all the exposure too. Like you love Antonio Gibson, but you only have him on 30% of your teams. Well, that's a good thing, because if Antonio Gibson gets hurt this year, then if you say you have him on all 15 of your dynasty teams, then all 15
of my dynasty teams suck
are tanked essentially. But if you only have them on 30%, then you still have 70% that still have a chance this year. And I think that's a good point, that some people make the mistake and they just try to get all the same players in the same league. And if you want a high exposure to a player, it should be somebody that's kind of like that waiver wire. You're kind of your dart throw, somebody that you're kind of banking on, because then as they move along, as they get better, you can trade. Say you have 80% of. I'll use myself for an example, because I got Tylan Wallace everywhere. Tylan Wallace breaks out with the Ravens, and I have him in 5 leagues, which is pretty much all the dynasty leagues I'm in right now, because I can't be in too many. But just a lot of time commitment. But so say he breaks out with the Ravens this year, next year, whenever. I should probably trade off 2 of those shares if let's just say, for example, he became a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. Unlikely, but it could happen. So that I only have so much rostership, because then if he gets hurt, which he does have a little bit of injury history, tearing his ACL at Oklahoma State, that I don't have as much risk there. But the guys that you're betting on, that you're picking up off of waivers, like a Marquez Callaway or somebody like that, it's okay to have like 80% rostership of them, because that's a guy you literally got for free. And if he does anything, you're trying to flip him and get more value out of him anyways.
Yeah, it's all a value game, really. Like that's what it comes down to, is like, what does that player offer you on your team in your starting lineup on a week-to-week basis, and what does that player offer you in a trade situation, right? And that's really what it comes down to for me. And so, I love the way you put that. I think that's fantastic, man.
Yeah, but I think that's a pretty good wrap on everything. Is there anything else you like to say? Otherwise, we'll get into kind of just where the people can find you again, and anything else you want to plug today.
No, I think I'm good, man. Just you can find my show. Coach joins me every Friday night. You can find us on the True North Fantasy Football Podcast Network on YouTube. You can find our website over at truenorthffb.com. And use promo code TNFF on Monkey Knife Fight to get $50 matched on your first deposit. We're going to be doing a Making Bank segment every single week, where we look at some over-unders on some of these player props for the week, for their weekly yardage totals. Maybe it'll be fantasy points totals. There's a lot of stuff that we can do on there. So definitely go check out Monkey Knife Fight. Check out the True North website at truenorthffb.com again. And yeah, just join us on Friday nights, 9 p.m. EST. It'll be me, Coach, and Chris at Detroit Beastie, rocking it out. We're going to have some guests every once in a while, but we'll be the 3 staples that you see on your Friday night live stream. So I'm looking forward to it, man. And yeah, you can find us over on the True North YouTube. Yeah,
it's going to be a very good season on True North Network as well. There's going to be too many podcasts to even list right now. There's that Gold Jacket podcast on Tuesday, Jet Sweep show on Monday. Smokey has the Smoke show here and there whenever that's popping up. True North pod on Wednesday, and then Thursday is the SODFS show, the guys that are making you the real big money, and then we'll follow it up on Friday, make you a little bit more money.
Boom. Yeah, it'll be awesome, because the SODFS show will be on Thursday nights. They'll cover the game slate for Sunday, the main slate, and then you, myself, and Chris will be covering the Monday night and the Sunday night games, as well as some over under props. So yeah, it should be a blast, man. I'm looking forward to it. I just pulled this up here as well, yeah. So that used to be all of our shows. Since this time down the ticker on the bottom, we actually have more shows now coming out, as well as more writers who are producing written content, almost daily at this point. So you got to go check it out at truenorthffb.com. Honestly, man, I can't say enough good things about the crew that we've got going there. And just a huge shout out to our Lord and Sealer, Travis Seal, for putting it all together and, and building this little family that we've got.
Yeah, definitely appreciate everybody that's on that team as well. And, it's just been a blast spending some time with you once again, Julien. Just talking some Dynasty. It's always fun to talk Dynasty. It's always fun to pick other people's brains as well. So,
I definitely agree. And, Dynasty, just the process of it all, like as we've talked about on this episode, it's one of my favorite things. It's why I got so invested in it, so intrigued by the whole concept of it all. So, if you're not in a Dynasty league, this is my last word. Go check it out.
Yep. And then once we get into next year, I'll be doing some writing about Dynasty contract leagues as well. So we're going to talk about how to get started in all those. And it's going to be pretty fun and exciting as well. But holding that off for about a year at this point in time.
Yeah, well, I'll have to read those articles, and then maybe I'll join a contract league with you, Coach.
Yep. But once again, thank you for coming on, Julien. It's been a blast. And if you guys are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Definitely would appreciate it. It really helps build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. That's one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you guys with your fantasy football, helping you guys with your DFS, whether it's NBA or NFL. Talking all the football news as it comes out. We got a Gardner Minshew trade to the Eagles today now, apparently.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Not sure if that one's super worth talking about or not, but might get a video out about that. And then as we get moving along in the season, as we get closer to the 2022 NFL draft, I'll be talking some prospects, and we'll have some exciting news regarding that coming up in the future as well. But with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for today's video. But with that being said, we both hope each and every one of you has enjoyed this video, and we hope you all have a great day.